Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alistair.
And this fortnight we're going to be talking about The Lego Movie 2, the second part, which you'd hope you'd managed to gather from that title is the sequel to The Lego Movie from a few years ago. And then we'll be asking related sub-question, which movie concept would involve more capitalism than this movie about literal toys crossing over about 7 different other franchises? Before all of that, Alistair, what other cultural things have you consumed in the last fortnight?
Well, I've been watching a new Netflix series.
Again?
Again, pretty much just like every other human being on the planet, my eyes are basically like glued to Netflix every second when I'm not eating, sleeping, or working. And to be honest, some of the time when I'm eating and working and sleeping is also Netflix time.
At least one person who works with you listens to this, don't they?
Yeah.
It's cool. I'll leave it in.
That's okay. Good. All right. I've been watching a new Netflix science fiction show called Night Flyers, which is, I think, quite a big production for Netflix. They certainly seem to spend a lot of money on it. It's based on the novella by George R.R. Martin. I don't know if they're hoping this will be another Game of Thrones, but I think they're certainly hoping it's going to be popular and run for several series. It's set in near-future Earth when the world has sort of been devastated by disease, or possibly climate change, some sort of nebulous threat that's wiping out humanity. And humans have discovered the existence of an alien spaceship that's flying kind of past the solar system on the very outer edge. And the TV show focuses on a ship called the Night Flyer, which is travelling from Earth to intercept this alien spaceship in the hope that they can help Earth with its many, many problems. And then there's lots of like weird and creepy things going on the ship. And there's an interesting cast of characters with sort of secrets and intrigue going on. So it's interesting. It's definitely on the sci-fi horror end of sci-fi. It's quite creepy. It's quite violent. As you expect from a George R.R. Martin adaptation, there's quite a lot of visceral violence and like quite a bit of sex. So it's not quite maybe Game of Thrones in space, but it's got some of that vibe.
And according to Wikipedia, the lead actor is the guy who played Sir Gawain in Merlin. So that's an endorsement, I suppose. I remember him being all right in what was a sort of quite small, all right bloke comedy relief part.
I've never seen Merlin, but I can imagine this character is quite different. He's playing a physics professor.
He's playing a man called Carl, according to Wikipedia.
Yeah, he's sort of the lead scientist. One of the plots is the kind of ongoing tension between the scientist crew of the ship and the kind of the ship's crew itself, I suppose, the engineers and sort of security people. Especially as one of the people in the science crew is this massively telepathic, quite dangerous character whose name temporarily escapes me because they usually just refer to him as the L1. And it kind of implies in future Earth, some human beings have developed telepathic abilities or general psychic abilities and have been persecuted quite heavily and everyone's terrified of them. So yeah, there's quite a lot of nasty things going on in people's heads and people kind of constantly at each other's throats.
Okay, the other thing I've discovered whilst vaguely picking around Wikipedia is that it was cancelled like 2 days ago.
Oh, I did not know that.
So yeah, there's a sink for your investment. There will be no more.
So I guess that proves it's not going to be another Game of Thrones.
No, but probably not. This is not going to be the next stage in the George R.R. Martin empire. I mean, I think at least one of these Game of Thrones prequels or spin-offs or whatever the hell they are is going into production. So I'm sure he'll still keep his tendrils stretching into television.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be an effort made to adapt like every possible George R.R. Martin property after the success of Game of Thrones. But I'm enjoying it. There's a good job that each character has like an intrigue or a secret or, I guess something about them that you're sort of quite keen to find out. Especially the captain of the ship who seems to keep himself entirely in his quarters and appears only to other people through hologram or security cameras. So I'm waiting to find out what the deal with him is, although they might save that for Series 2, which is now not going to happen. So.
Because I'm waiting to find out if you're waiting to find out what actually be rewarded or if it'll just be left for Season 2.
Yeah, well, as it's a novella, maybe they wrap up all the plot. 8-hour-long episodes is probably a lot for one novella. Maybe it's like The Handmaid's Tale, they burn through all the plot in the first series, and then we're going to come up with interesting other plots in later series, but I guess there's no need if there's no more books or series.
That's probably the best case scenario for you at this point, isn't it?
Oh well, I still recommend it, though that is slightly disappointing. Anyway, Nick, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Well, I spent most of my culture time in the last 2 weeks finishing off that Robin Ince book and watching Russian Doll myself, which are the two pop culture things we discussed in this segment in the last episode, so mostly it's been quite repetitive from a podcast perspective. But And like a couple of days ago, I did start watching Homicide: Life on the Streets, the 90s cop show adaptation of a book called Homicide: A Year on the Killing Streets, which I think I talked about on this podcast a while ago. In fact, I also described a chunk of it in story form that time we appeared on And Then What. It's a book by David Simon, the screenwriter and journalist best known for co-creating The Wire. And yeah, it's basically a conventional cop show. It is actually not showrun by David Simon in the same way. It's showrun by a guy called Tom Fontana, based on David Simon's book, although I think he does get a number of screenwriting credits for episodes, especially as the series goes on. But yeah, it's a little bit more conventional a cop show, although it's still got, especially considering this is the 90s, a surprising reliance on sort of overall arc plots, rather than trying to actually give you an individual story in each episode. There's usually quite a lot of slow-burning stuff, and there's one tiny thing that actually gets resolved. The thing they've inherited from the book, really, apart from a few of the cases, like in the first 4 episodes, they do the Black Widow storyline I described in the And Then What segment.
Oh, excellent. So you get to see it dramatised in real life.
Yeah, there's a bit in that story where a kid marries his aunt, and then the police ask him why he marries his aunt, and he just said, he took me to see some guy, and some guy said we were no longer related and could now get married. And you didn't question this? No. Yeah, that works quite well on the screen.
Just as it works quite well on And Then What.
Yeah, in case that wasn't enough back in time cross-promotion. Go and listen to our Then What guest spot, it was fun. Anyway, yeah, the focus is very much on the daily grind of police work. The whole, actually it's a lot more complicated than that thing that David Simon was doing in the book is very much carried through here, in that there's not really any Sherlockian aha, I've got it moments. It's all, when they do solve a case, it's through, vigorous trudging and pulling things apart one by one and, just working their way down the line, rather than having that many particularly television-friendly moments of inspiration.
It sounds a bit similar to Law and Order, a show that kind of focuses on being a realistic cop show about how these processes and procedures actually work. As I suppose this TV show is based on a non-fiction book, I guess there is that emphasis on telling like real-life, realistic stories. But it sounds like something that's maybe quite procedurally focused, even for a cop show. But in a good way, I guess, trying to accurately capture what it's like to be a homicide detective.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen 4 episodes. So far, based on the 4 episodes I've seen, they seem to have managed to weave a nice line between, making cop work seem a bit less glamorous and digging into what it's, air quotes, actually like, but still actually being entertaining. The dialogue's not quite as telly wisecracks as some shows, but it's still quite zingy and back and forth. It's got this sort of ponderous, rambling style, but to be honest, shows like The Wire do quite well out of. But yeah, there's like 7 seasons of it, most of which are like 20 episodes long, so it's probably keep me going a while.
Well, it's a proper American TV show. Seems like it's quite ahead of its time. It was like a 90s show that, with the kind of emphasis on arc plots, because when you think of like big 90s shows, like X-Files or Buffy or things like that, like 90s like drama shows, like they are quite episodic, whereas it's not until you get into like the early 2000s with like 24 and Lost that like the emphasis really switches to like arc plot.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'll be interested to see whether they make it more episodic in the subsequent years in a bid to try and appeal more to the masses. But yeah, as at this point in its very early episodes, like in the first season's only 13 episodes, and then it jumps up to like 20 after this. In its early stages, it seems to be doing some quite ambitious arc plotty stuff. I'll see whether they ever got the guts to keep it up. So anyway, yes, this is me crossing another item off my David Simon stuff list. I say crossing it off. It'll probably take me most of the year, and possibly some of next year, to actually get anywhere near watching the whole thing.
First up this episode, we'll be discussing The Lego Movie 2, the second part. This film picks up where the previous one left off, with Duplo invading the Lego world. This review also might make very little sense if you haven't seen the original Lego movie, as it's kind of dependent on your understanding, or at least been familiar with Lego products in general. Anyway, at the end of the original Lego movie, Duplo, owned by the sort of kid in the first one, younger sister, invades the Lego world. We then flash forward in time to Apocalypseburg, a grim post-apocalyptic wasteland where everyone is broody, apart from the sunny construction worker Emmett. When an alien spaceship arrives, it kidnaps all of Emmett's friends, the characters in the first film, Wildstar, Batman, etc. He must go on a quest to save them, although he has to toughen up if he's going to succeed. So we saw this in the cinema recently. So Nick, what did you think of it?
Well, when I watched the first one, I came away thinking, well, you probably can't really do a sequel to that. And they've pretty much successfully done one, I think, almost entirely based on the premise they set up at the end of the first one, so I guess I should have seen that coming, really. I don't think it's quite as good as the first one, if only because the first one was obviously such a massive surprise hit and sudden, out of nowhere, oh my god, how was that so good moment, and there's this comes unavoidably with the weight of expectation, and I think it's not quite as beautifully simple as the first one ended up being. It's not quite as clear. Some of the jokes feel a bit, we saw that in the first one. But having said all that, it's still very good and very fun, and I do appreciate the sort of attempts to do some sort of a different meta message rather than just rehashing the first one. Like, they've just pivoted towards the revelation from the end of the Lego Movie, wherein, spoilers for the Lego Movie, I might try and avoid over-spoiling the Lego Movie 2, but I am going to spoil the Lego Movie 1, in which that you pull back a bit and the Lego world is indeed a bunch of toys being played with by two kids whose dad is Will Ferrell. It turns out everything that's been happening, or at least almost everything that's been happening in the Lego world we've been watching for most of the film is actually them playing around. In the first film there were sort of subtle hints about this revelation being oncoming, and in this film it's fairly on the nose. There's characters talking about Armageddon as the big oncoming threat, which in the first film would have given the game away, but in this one, you know, we know it's some kids playing, so we can probably just safely be relied on to notice that Armageddon is Armageddon caused by their mom. So yeah, I like the way they actually move forward with that and tried to develop it more. I think it gets quite weird and fiddly and confusing at times, but I do appreciate their attempt to actually, is deepen the mythology the right word? I don't know, but go further with it. So yeah, I think it's interesting. I think they've definitely made an effort to do something interesting and different when they didn't necessarily have to. And to be honest, the parts that didn't work as well for me were the parts where it was just the same characters from last time doing the same jokes.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. Like, they kept everything that you liked about the first film, which I guess was good. Like, more of the same did, I think, work in this regard. Like, it had the same sort of humor, same sense of humor, same kind of density of jokes. It still had like the catchy songs and things like that. In fact, there was probably even more catchy songs this time around than last time. And there certainly wasn't this sense of like diminishing returns. Like, they hadn't like hit on something that's like, oh, that's really, really funny and interesting, or at least funny the first time. And the second time you come back, you're like, it's just really not as good. Like, obviously examples like Austin Powers, when like the first one was like quite funny, especially as like lampooning James Bond probably wasn't as much a cultural mainstay as it is now. But then the second one was very much, this feels like serious diminishing returns. They're repeating a lot of the jokes and, and so on. But I didn't feel with this one there was that sense of diminishing returns. And obviously it was good to see characters and things that you found funny before. Like the Lego Batman character is a great pastiche of the kind of dark and serious Batman that we've had on Christopher Nolan films onwards. Yeah, that was, if you want more of the same, but without it feeling like diminishing returns, then I think this is a good film. There are some things like about how the plot I felt was a bit confusing and didn't really make a lot of sense, but I guess it is kind of like a sort of bright, colourful, slight acid trip of a children's film, so I don't know to what extent the fact that the plot doesn't really make sense is really like legitimate criticism, because you're mainly there for like the jokes and the kind of cool visuals and the catchy songs. But I'm trying to dance around spoiling it, but I did think that there's a sort of time travel element to the story, which I was basically, I don't really understand how this makes sense. And time travel obviously famously always overcomplicates plots, and you have to plot very tightly to do time travel well, unless it's going to be like some MacGuffin that exists in the background, like in like Terminator, or you're just going to completely like throw continuity and sense to the wind like Doctor Who does. But in this, I was just left slightly scratching my head. But then again, I guess kind of mid-30s podcast reviewers is probably impressing people like me is probably not what they were aiming for the plot in this. It was like impressing like a sort of an 8-year-old. So maybe I'm just opening an egg with a sledgehammer or something.
I came away from the first one kind of interested whether, it was meant to function purely as a metaphor, or if you just had to accept that the Lego is magic and alive in order for the plot to work. I think in the first one there are a few bits where, during the Will Ferrell sequence at the end, where Lego moves by itself. So it's possible that even in the first one, you did have to accept that the Lego was magic and alive. But in the second one, I think you definitely do, or the plot is completely incomprehensible.
Yeah, only if you accept it as a kind of the vaguest sort of outline, or that what you're seeing in Lego is a very heavily abstracted form of what you are seeing in the live action sequences. But then again, I don't think they were trying to create some kind of abstract work of art here. I think they were just trying to create an entertaining kids film.
Well, yeah, I think there's still meant to be some sort of metaphor in that the Lego is, they're these weird avatars fighting for the soul of these kids, especially the little boy, who is sort of represented by two of the characters, the the Emmett one and this new character. Is it Rex? It is Rex, isn't it?
Yeah, Rex.
And this new character Vex they meet, both of whom are voiced by Chris Pratt. Rex being Chris Pratt basically doing a pastiche of his two most famous characters from Jurassic World and Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah.
So, to the extent that the Lego stuff functions as a metaphor, it's these two characters pulling this kid back and forth between, as he grows into adolescence, going towards being a sort of grim, grumpy, apocalypse-obsessed, miserable adolescent, or just being a nice kid. And I think the film is vaguely meant to be functioning as a critique of needless adolescent doom and gloom.
Especially as it's got Batman in it.
Part of me is a bit, have we seen all the Lego Batman jokes now? Now that we've had 2 Lego movies and an entire Lego Batman movie. But on the other hand, if you're going to make the entire film basically a function of, is it really necessary for adolescent boys to collapse into this obsession with dark grittiness, and you have the chance to have Batman in it, I can see that it's kind of hard to resist.
Yeah, exactly, because Batman is responsible, I think, for a lot of the, especially the Nolan Batmans, are responsible for a lot of the kind of moody, teenager, dark and gritty superhero stuff, as we have discussed at length on this podcast.
Yeah, I think things like The Dark Knight have ended up being kind of the avatar for that kind of film, which is why obviously I can see why you'd have Batman in it, even if I felt like, although I liked the continuation of Emmett and Wildstyle's story, and again, I'm obviously enormously the target audience for meta jokes about Batman.
Yeah.
Part of me wondered if the rest of the crew, they could have brought in some new characters. Like, I like Spaceship Man as much as the rest of the world, but I felt like there were new characters with new jokes they could have plugged into the place of Spaceship Man and the little cute kitty one, instead of just bringing them back to do their same 2 jokes again. That was basically the point where I felt like we were getting into, or at least gently, tentatively stepping into diminishing returns territory.
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple of new characters that introduced, like, there's this kind of shape-shifting villainess sort of character, which is interesting because obviously it's like a character that's made out of Lego and keeps changing her shape because she can have different bits of Lego, which was, again, a new character that's introduced. And then there was there's this sci-fi alien that abducts Emmett's friends at the beginning, who I believe is some kind of Lego product that exists for kids who are too old to play with Duplo, but probably shouldn't be given Lego in case they swallow it. I think these are like toys that have come on the market since I used to play with Lego, something that's like kind of a bit chunkier than Lego, but not quite as sort of colossal as Duplo. But anyway, so there's a few new characters. Again, I also probably like to plug new products, but we'll come to that in this question half of the show.
And ultimately, I think a lot of this stuff, it's probably not meant to function as some vast Uber narrative. It's just meant to be, all leaning into the ongoing point of stop being such a moody little teenage boy and just play nicely with your sister, which is basically the point of the entire film. And, they're fairly upfront about it. If you wanted the second Lego movie to set up some sort of Lego movie tradition of M. Night Shyamalan-esque twists, then sadly they haven't done that. But on the other hand, it is better than most of his last few films. So
yeah, including Glass, probably.
Including Glass, yes.
There's no need for them to try and twist this time because it's it's obvious what the deal is after the twist the first time. But
yeah,
like the first one, I think did a really good job of like kind of literally pulling back from the narrative to bring in this kind of broader metaphor of grown-ups stop being so serious and just have some fun with your kids. And then in the second one, it's quite nice to have, especially as they like kind of jump forward in time, in that the daughter is clearly like at the end of Lego Movie is playing with Duplo, which is where Duplo invades, and now she's old enough to play with this kind of weird in-between product and Lego itself. So I guess there's like, and the kid's gone from being like happily playing with kind of the silly Lego stuff to like building like dark and desolate post-apocalyptic landscapes out of Lego because he's become a moody teenager. But they pivot that quite well, as you say, towards a metaphor of like, be nice to your sister, stop being so like I'm just so, I'm such a teenager, everything sucks. I'm going to go listen to Soundgarden. I don't think teenagers listen to Soundgarden anymore. I don't think teenagers listened to Soundgarden when I was young. Anyway, then and obviously just like have some good old-fashioned, unpretentious fun playing Lego with your sister, because these golden years only last so long and all that sort of thing. But yeah, that kind of works quite well, although it is a touching and very sweet metaphor. The first film was great in that it was like funny, sweet, or funny, little bit dark, sweet is kind of a really like good arc for like a kid's film. Like, it's one that like, Pixar really nails. And I kind of liked how this one also tried to do like funny, sweet. But I don't know, it didn't quite as hang together as neatly as the first one. But then again, I guess that's because the first one worked so well, it's probably never going to work that well again.
Actually, possibly coming off what you just said, possibly they didn't quite get I don't know. I mean, I was going to say we didn't quite get the dark bit well enough. They had a fairly obvious, heavily signposted dark bit in that there's a bit towards the end, which I probably shouldn't spoil because spoiling jokes is just the worst. But yeah, there's a bit at the end where it acts as if something really dark is going to happen and then it just doesn't. And yeah, it's very, very funny.
Also involves a vague sideways pop at or joke on Avengers Infinity War as well.
Yeah. So yeah, the dark bit is also there. So yeah, I don't know. Possibly I just didn't feel like it gave me the big hit of rock bottom. Maybe, ironically, even though I loved that joke we just mentioned, the fact that they undercut it with a joke almost instantly meant I didn't, feel it as much. I don't know.
There was a second when I genuinely thought they were going to do a Avengers Infinity War style ending.
Yeah.
We should probably avoid saying too much about this because we're going to either A, spoil it, or B, just end up being tantalisingly vague, both of which are annoying.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got a few other criticisms of the film, but I guess I should couch them in the fact of what I've already said is that this is a film aimed at kids, and I think it's a good kids film, and it is entertaining for adults, especially if you like the first one. But so when I say these aspects of the dramatic structure didn't work, it's kind of with a caveat that it does work as a kids film. But there's one thing which I sort of didn't really get, which is that what the kind of personal journeys of the character was supposed to be, because your sort of basic personal journey should be a story of growth for a character. There's lots of children becoming grown-up stories like Star Wars or A Few Good Men, or there's lots of learning to love stories Rain Man or things like that. But this one, there's a sort of story of, as I laid out, Emmett, who's sunny and happy and optimistic and is still singing Everything Is Awesome from the first film in this post-apocalyptic wasteland. And he's got this idea that he's got to learn to grow up and be serious. And there's also kind of Wild Style, his girlfriend or special best friend, as they say in the show, her wanting him to kind of grow up and take life more seriously. And I guess this is slightly spoilery, so do skip ahead if you really don't want any spoilers for the film, which is, it's kind of revealed, as we sort of hinted at through this whole thing about don't be a moody teenager and play with your sister, that Emmett doesn't need to grow up and become dark and moody. He's better as he is. I'm not really sure what the growth story is here. The growth story is that Emmett should stay the same, which kind of flies in the face of the way most things are written. And the kind of story is, I guess I guess she's got a personal growth story that she should accept Emmett who she is, not want to change him. But she's kind of not the main character. So I just felt that didn't work so well.
I mean, if we're going to dive wankily into plot structure, why not? There's a storytelling bit by Dan Harmon, which I've seen quoted around quite a lot, that at the end of the story, the lead character should return to the situation they came from, having changed. Yeah. And I guess the change in Emmett in so much is that he has returned to the situation he came from, and he's now more comfortable with himself or something. It's a bit splitting hairs, I admit. But yeah, I guess the idea is that he's, at peace with himself and is no longer as racked with self-doubt. I suppose is more or less the answer. I mean, it's a franchise film. A lot of the time, the hero's main journey in a franchise film is sometimes basically, well done, you've survived to appear in the next one in the franchise. But some degree of self-acceptance is meant to be Emmett's journey.
Yeah, that does make sense.
So yeah, that's my opinion.
I guess that sort of makes sense. But I felt it could have worked better. But like I say, it's a kid's film, so the fact that the personal growth story doesn't work as well isn't a great criticism, and it does probably work better than say I don't know, some superhero films like Ant-Man and the Wasp, but it didn't have a particularly detailed personal growth story for the characters. It's just more some entertaining film in which things sort of expand and shrink.
Yeah,
and so there was an attempt to do something with characterization.
Yeah.
Yeah, the jokes were good, though. They got a lot of their favourite jokes out again. I did like also how they had a joke in the kind of live-action bits with the family about how painful it is to tread on Lego barefoot.
Yeah, no, I liked seeing Maya Rudolph as the mum. That was funny. All in all, I mean, the problem with reviewing this sort of film is, aside from my initial surprise might be the wrong word, my initial slight scepticism that they could do a good sequel to this, once it was clear they were doing a good sequel to this, in a lot of ways it's just a good sequel. They've found some interesting new angles on it, but yeah. It's a good film. If you enjoy sort of heartwarming children's films with enough cleverness to entertain the adults, then yeah, both the Lego Movie and the Lego Movie 2 are probably a good shout. I must admit, that's pretty much the end of my critical essay.
Yeah, and it's worth sticking with the end credits as well, which we stayed around for, because they are funny and entertaining.
Oh yeah, I mean, you probably don't need to sit through the entire list of animators, because it's not like there's an end credits scene or anything, but there is a funny Lonely Island song about credits over the first bit of the credits, the bit with the cool animation. Yeah. Once the cool animation finishes, you can probably leave.
Next, we'll be discussing which film concept would involve more capitalism. So, as discussed, the Lego movie is basically a giant toy commercial. When it's not a toy commercial, it's basically an advert for Batman, other DC products, Star Wars and Harry Potter characters. So, yeah, this is basically kind of one giant, very entertaining, very funny advert, which is why I thought it was a bit odd that when the first Lego movie came out and it was revealed that the villain was called Lord Business, that certain sections of the American right were like, oh, this is socialist propaganda for kids. And it's like the biggest toy commercial of all time. Some people really, I just do not understand. Anyway, leaving that aside, this is a giant toy commercial, but is it possible to get more capitalistic in a film? Is there any other way you could make a film that in some way involves more blatant attempts just to shift merch? Which film concept would involve more capitalism? Nick, do you have any thoughts?
I haven't done Justice League versus Avengers yet, but then again, there's quite a lot of characters in this, so you'll probably need to go to Justice League versus Avengers versus Transformers versus Teenage Mutant Turtles versus Pokemon versus Mario versus Sonic versus Call of Duty. I mean, basically, you could just bolt on as many franchises as you want.
Eventually, it's going to happen, probably.
And you'd eventually basically get the movie equivalent of Super Smash Brothers.
Yeah. Yeah, that's basically it in a nutshell, yeah. Well, Super Smash Brothers is basically an amazing attempt to cross-sell different franchises. And also make a very fun game.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, the beauty of this form of capitalism is we can let them get away with almost anything as long as, the creative side is vaguely good. Like, the Lego movie is impressive primarily because it's generally accepted as being a good force in culture, despite the volume of capitalism on display. And also, I mean, much as we might poke fun at the more annoying, obnoxious aspects of the American right for getting annoyed about a villain called Lord Business in, as you say, this massive money-making film. It is quite impressive they managed to get a villain called Lord Business and a broadly anti-business, or at least anti-aggressive, pointless, angry capitalism message into this massive commercial.
Yeah, so I guess it's just to make everyone happy, or maybe to make everyone unhappy, who knows. I guess the Lego movie is trying very hard to please everyone in its sort of sunny Europop sort of way.
It's a very hard film to dislike because even the anti-capitalist messages that exist are quite heavily buried. Like, you can probably just not think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess to an extent it does have the style of the time with this sort of high-speed, knowingly wacky, ironic quippiness, which I suspect some people might just find annoying. But as long as you're vaguely down with the film style of the time, it's pretty much there for everybody, I think.
And I think also the idea of having, crossovers is, I don't know, something that people like. Maybe it's because of the success of, Avengers that people are trying to do crossovers in sort of less obvious ways. I saw recently Wreck-It Ralph 2, in which they came up with the idea, well, we'll just take the characters people liked from the first films, some of which were obviously just carbon copies of characters sort of from popular culture. In the first Wreck-It Ralph film, the main woman character's name, I can't remember off the top of my head, is basically sort of a combination of Master Chief from Halo and Samus Aran from Metroid. But in the second film, when they plug the game into the internet itself, they just bring in all sorts of things from Disney-owned properties, which is basically everything. So there's the Avengers in it, there are Star Wars characters in it, there's Disney princesses, there's all sorts of just various commercial properties just thrown at the wall in a kind of look at all the stuff you like in one film kind of way, which the Lego movie does as well. Look, here's a joke about Gandalf, here's a joke about Superman, here's a joke about, I don't know, Doctor Who or Bill and Ted. It's very much kind of look at all the things you love kind of thrown at the wall.
It's a good point, actually. I was thinking when I saw the trailer for Wreck-It Ralph 2, is that finally too much capitalism? Is the bits where they wander around inside, air quotes, the internet going, oh, it's Amazon and Google. Is that finally too much capitalism? Might that finally be when it's enough?
Yeah, they use actual brands. And then, although the actual brands are very much in the background, such as the plot involving a search engine is not Google, because I guess they don't want to poke fun at Google too much. And the sort of social network in Wreck-It Ralph is basically seems to be a combination of YouTube and Facebook. So they do make attempts to sort of vaguely obscure things, but it is basically a kind of here is a lot of Disney-owned IP thrown at the wall.
Yeah, for some reason the whole wow, look at Amazon and Google part always struck me as slightly more depressing than look, it's Star Wars, the Avengers, and whatever else. I mean, yeah, it's one of these things you could veil with enough stuff. As long as you give the characters you bring in for cameos a personality and don't just have them be meat on the screen, then you do get the sort of, oh, it's them moments. I mean, even though Green Lantern, I guess because his film flopped a few years back, is now basically used in Lego Movie as the sort of sad hanger-on.
Yeah.
And it's basically the butt of all the jokes. I'm not sure if there is meant to be a meta joke of this is because your film didn't do very well, but that's certainly how I take it.
Yeah, I assume that's what it's going for, because they're not making a joke about Green Lantern's personality. Like, they make a joke about how Batman is like kind of a bit too dark and serious, takes himself too seriously. Superman is like a bit too much of a wholesome, all-American good chap. Green Lantern is just like an annoying hanger-on. If you make a joke about Green Lantern's personality, it would go over the heads of probably most people in the audience, especially most 8-year-olds, but they can make a joke about he's the one with the sucky film. And like, this film also had jokes about Aquaman now, so Aquaman's mainstream enough for a Lego movie joke.
Yeah, I liked how they had both classic Aquaman and regular Aquaman.
Yeah.
But I liked it. I mean, they've referenced the property I recognised in a vaguely knowing, self-aware way. Yeah, I don't know whether we're getting to the joke, whether Hitler could get away with it nowadays, as long as he demonstrated a knowing, self-aware sense of irony.
Just to get deadly serious for a minute, you are actually right, though, that like knowing irony is a tactic of the far right. There's a website called Stormfront, which I know is basically like a gathering place for neo-Nazis.
Oh,
it has been...
God. I've seen their style guide, yeah. So anyway, tell the listeners about it, Alistair.
Yeah, they had a style guide that was leaked to the press, and basically they say that they try to be humorous as well as horrible. The idea is you can't tell if this is like a joke or if they're being serious. I guess they're kind of going for that kind of Family Guy sense of humor with oh my God, he said the most shocking thing possible. Like, is it funny? Is it just genuine anti-Semitism or racism? Like, yeah, that kind of knowing tongue-in-cheek right-wing extremism is like totally a thing on the internet. And I have known people to be taken in with like, I read this horrible thing, but I couldn't tell if the guy was joking or not. It was like, that's because it's deliberate. So yeah, don't be taken in by... Is this ironic extremism? Because it can be ironic extremism and actual extremism.
Frankly, there's no ironic extremism in the Lego movie. Yeah, stepping back from genuine hate groups, that is also, I guess, how you get people to swallow what is basically a massive commercial. As long as you show at least a hint of knowing irony.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily even have to go as far as laughing at yourself. You just have to be willing to accept that this is quite a gratuitous cameo, or just really hit the tropes of the character quite hard. Yeah. Like, ironically, we'll probably come out of an Aquaman cameo liking Aquaman more if he makes a slightly self-deprecating remark, or if he does his catchphrase in a slightly knowing way, which I think is basically what Jason Momoa's Aquaman. I don't know if it's actually voiced by Momoa, I assume it probably isn't, does here, but he just does a couple of whoa noises.
Exactly, it's just like, it's what you said before, it's like, oh, there's the thing that I recognise, and you get that kind of like warm sense that you're in on the joke, and like you're a clever person because you pick up the thing. So as long as you can do that, then you can throw as much toy commercials the audience as they like, and also as long as it's got the warm bit on the end, and it works as a film.
Conversely, did you see on the internet the day before we're recording this on the 23rd of February, by the way, in case any of this capitalism chat or far right chat starts to date badly.
Yeah,
there was a short video clip of RoboCop being used in a KFC ad dressed up as Colonel Sanders.
No, I did not see this.
That was going around the internet a bit. It was sort of a Colonel Sanders version of RoboCop being used on in KFC ads. And yeah, it's actually an interesting example of something that completely fails to do the thing we're talking about, because it doesn't make any clever jokes or uses of RoboCop at all. I mean, firstly, I'm pretty sure RoboCop itself was somewhat anti-capitalist, so...
Like a lot of Paul Verhoeven movies, it's set in a sort of totalitarian future. It's like the idea is that the cops aren't supposed to be necessarily the good guys. There's a bit when there's like the drone malfunctions in the board meeting and like massacres all the executives of the company, which is quite funny. So yeah, RoboCop is supposed to be a bit anti-capitalist, or at least tongue-in-cheek, or is there something more intelligent going on there than like just like a metal man like shoots criminals?
Yeah, whereas this just had RoboCop turn up, glue some bits of facial hair to his mask so he vaguely resembled Colonel Sanders, and then stomp around carrying the KFC secret formula into a vault. And it's just, you see, what you missed here was the slightest ironic humour or the slightest clever engagement with the RoboCop concept. You've tried to do a Lego movie on a very low scale and you've completely fucked it. I mean...
It's a pretty damning review.
It's a pretty damning review I'm delivering of this KFC ad, which I'm sure is what people listen to this podcast for.
Yeah.
All I wanted was some continuity. What I wanted to know is whether they chopped Colonel Sanders up to turn him into RoboCop.
Or KFC.
Just try to do away with Colonel Sanders as a mascot, because let's face it, he clearly owned slaves. And just kill him and turn him into a robot.
I guess we can give up on... our sponsorship. Deal with KFC now, Nick.
Would that involve more capitalism?
MFV brought to you by KFC.
No, I don't know. KFC the movie? Ronald McDonald the movie? The big budget Ronald McDonald movie where he finally does full CGI battle with the Hamburglar.
I am surprised they haven't considered doing the Ronald McDonald movie. It's like nothing is beyond the pale anymore. So the Ronald McDonald movie, yeah, is probably one of the things that's like going to happen. Just like I was generally trying to think of like other like nakedly capitalistic like films that are just like giant adverts, and I think I managed to find probably one that's like worse than the Lego movie for this. I do want to stress before this, I haven't seen this film, so it might be A, brilliant, or B, not as like so obviously a toy commercial. But there was like a time in like the early 2000s when scrabbling around for like intellectual property to develop, Hollywood hit on the idea of like childhood games. We can like turn these into like films. I think they only got as far as making one of these ideas, but they genuinely made a film of battleships.
Oh god, Battleship starring Rihanna. Yes,
yeah, starring Rihanna and Liam Neeson. And but anyway, the plot, if you could call it that, genuinely of battleships is like an alien spaceship, I think, crashes near some US military ships that are on maneuvers and jams their targeting system. So they have to fire like at random into like an area of water, hoping they hit the alien ship, which is like the most obvious plug for like what is a fairly simple concept for a children's toy. But apparently this was going to be like the beginning of like a whole series of films based on children's like toys and things like that. Clearly, obviously trying to sell more toys as well as more films. I believe like they were going to do Stretch Armstrong, the film, was one of the ones that was in development.
What about Mousetrap? Were they going to do Operation?
Mousetrap would actually probably be quite good. I think that is...
Was it, though?
I don't know. There is like a weird film, I think it might even be called Mousetrap. Like a kid's film about like two bungling people trying to catch like a mouse in a house. It's very much in the sort of Home Alone style of humour.
There's a long-running West End play which disappointingly is not based on the board game.
No, that is an Agatha Christie adaptation. That is the longest running stage show of all time. There you go. There's another fact.
I would like to see them do the McDonald's movie and try and make it actually good. I feel that the day they can make the McDonald's movie creatively work with enough ironic humour is the day that they've truly arrived at shifting shit to us. Mostly because that clown has become such a pervasive symbol of evil overreaching capitalism.
Yeah.
If they can make us love him, then I feel like they've probably done.
There also, it's an uphill struggle because of people's general dislike of clowns. And there is something like fairly sinister about like Ronald McDonald's. It's like a clown who spends all his time with children. I suppose most clowns spend all their time with children.
I was going to say, what are you saying about the entire profession?
I don't know, actually. Well, of all the people who are probably unfairly maligned, it's probably clowns. But I think...
yeah. And he spends all his time hanging around with kids. How creepy is that? Just trying to earn a living, mate. Leave me alone.
Shifting hamburgers. Yeah.
They could have him cross over with the clown from It. That would
I was about to say, in a post-It world, trying to make like a sympathetic kids clown film is probably just really not going to happen.
I mean, the second It movie is, I think, meant to be coming out at some point in the next year or two.
Yeah, it's later this year.
If it ends with Ronald McDonald turning up to bop him on the nose, then, frankly, everyone listening to this owes me about £5.
There'll be a substantial departure from the novel.
It's okay, we don't have that many listeners. It wouldn't be that substantial a win for me.
No, exactly.
I mean, I've occasionally, as I've said on this podcast before, read some Transformers comics. One specific series written by one specific writer. This is the More Than Meets the Eye and Lost Light series, written by James Roberts, by the way. They are good. They brought the Transformers comics as a whole. Thankfully, it didn't affect the ones I was reading that much, because the plot necessitates they be off in a spaceship by themselves. But the rest of the Transformers universe joined the sort of Hasbro Toys shared universe in the comics, with like G.I. Joe and Mask.
Oh, right.
For some reason, this seemed a bit of a annoyingly on-the-nose grab for me. I swear to God, they must have been going towards trying to do this in the films. It completely flops in the comics, to be honest. They basically killed their own franchise, because Transformers was actually doing well, so they bolted this other shit onto it and killed the Golden Goose, and now they've had to reboot that whole universe to get away from it.
Well, that backfired.
Including cancelling the series I liked, so yeah. Fuck you, capitalism, again. But that would have been an impressive multi-way money grab gangbang if it had actually made it to the screen.
Well, they did do 2 G.I. Joe films, I guess, which is just another attempt, I guess, to sell action figures. Although the first one had, I think, Christopher Eccleston and Joseph Gordon-Levitt in it, so they did manage to get some quite high-profile people. I think also Channing Tatum.
Isn't that one of the films Chris Eccleston now does interviews about, saying it made him want to slit his own throat?
Yes, it is.
That is
probably one.
That's For the Dark World.
Yeah, although it probably paid for him to do some interesting, unusual art house film or like extended run, of some obscure place somewhere. But anyway, Christopher Eccleston's bizarre love-hate relationship with geeky intellectual property is probably a topic for another day. But yeah, they did do a attempt to make, again, commercials, giant toy commercial G.I. Joe films. They had The Rock in the second one, which at least made it more entertaining. Although those films are very confusing because they're basically an army movie that always has like a big ninja bit in the middle, which is just like utterly baffling. And I assume it's just an attempt to shift the ninja G.I. Joe toys as well as the army ones.
Are their ninjas better or worse than the hands from the Defenders?
To be honest, they're probably better than the hand because
Oh, God.
they dispensed with the sort of mystical bullshit, and it's just there's like the black ninjas and the white ninjas, and they fight each other like whilst hanging from ropes on the side of a cliff. It is nothing if not spectacular to watch on the big screen, and the hand is nothing but boring.
Since we got there, a moment of silence, please, for the Marvel Netflix shows, which were finally put out of their misery since our last episode. As I said on the MFV Twitter account, I'd like to thank Marvel, Netflix, Disney for at least having the decency to wait until we put out our Punisher episode before dropping the cancellation news, so we didn't look too horrifically out of date.
Yeah.
Cheers, guys.
That is the end of the Defenders universe.
With the caveat that Jessica Jones Season 2 has to come out pre-cancelled, yes.
Well, you can check back in the podcast later when we'll probably be reviewing that.
Yeah, I imagine we'll probably do some sort of vague eulogy for those when we cover Jessica Jones, so we'll move on.
Yeah. One thing I was thinking is that, in essence, like, all films, apart from probably like very art house films, are kind of giant commercials. Like, you know, obviously, as like, you know, big Marvel films are just an attempt to sell other Marvel films through the crossovers and end credit sequences, as well as Marvel comics and TV shows and action figures. And even like deadly serious films, like this year's like Oscar films and things like that. For a long time, cinema's release for films is just kind of a giant trailer for the DVD. I believe that very few films really make money from cinema releases. The money is made in selling DVDs or increasingly now streaming services on subscription to streaming services. So the point in bringing something out in the cinema is to make it look more legitimate and to generate buzz and interest for your DVD sales. So even things that are like kind of great works of art, the cinema release is just a kind of commercially, it's just a prelude for a DVD release. I mean, the Oscars play perfectly into this. You release your big artistic film, some of which, don't get me wrong, are obviously very good, very expressive and great works of art. They win Oscars. When the DVD comes out, they get to slap across the top, winner of 5 Academy Awards, and they shift more units for the DVD. I mean, Hollywood doesn't put out films like, you know, Moonlight or The Favourite because it once a year suddenly realizes it should try and pretend like an artistic medium. It's because it's a different way to shift units from, you know, all the ways we talked about, from Marvel tie-ins to toy tie-ins. It's just cinema, I guess it is a business, and it is basically a means of shifting profitable units. I mean, now that Disney is going to start selling like a whole package Netflix-style streaming subscription service, in essence, the future release of like many Disney-owned films in the cinema are basically just giant adverts for the Disney subscription service that you can pay for, which is where Disney's really going to make their money. So, like, yeah, film is business. It's all advertising, really. It's business that can occasionally create great works of art, and I'm still determined to sift through, I don't know, the endless, like, coin chink of money pouring in to find the occasional work that is of artistic merit. But it is one giant advert, basically.
Yeah, it is interesting to see where the barrier is, especially with the sort of media we talk about on this podcast, where the barrier is where people get a bit sort of, well, you haven't earned the right to ask for this much money, you know. This is not going to be the thing you think it is. You've been too obvious about trying to turn it into a thing. Like, I'm not even going to bother singling anyone out. Basically, every painfully obvious attempt to copy the Marvel Cinematic Universe in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
All of them, pretty much. There does seem to have been a vague agreement by moviegoers as a whole to just look at them and go, no, you haven't put in enough effort to justify us giving you that much money. Fuck off, buddy.
Yeah.
I guess on some level it's comforting that quality still to some degree matters, but yeah, it is all just, you know, have we put in enough effort to get access to the money?
Exactly, yeah. There's a threshold, things like that. Which I suppose now that I've got like Netflix at home, which I'm paying for, and Netflix does have lots of good stuff on it. Like as I said at the top of the show, Night Flies I think is genuinely good. So even someone like me who really loves the cinema and has a podcast to find content for, you do need to justify me getting off the sofa, going down to the local Cineworld and exchanging the better part of a tenner for 2 hours. You know, when there's like Russian Doll you've got to compete against.
Well, yeah, I mean, as someone who doesn't love the cinema as a general art form as much as you do, to be honest, it's quite hard for me to be persuaded, considering the comparative amount of money to hours of entertainment gleaned value. You know, yeah. I mean, that's 1.5 to 2 months of Netflix subscription I'm paying for 2 hours, which could well be shit. And based on some of the films we've reviewed in the last few months, could very well be shit. Capitalism is a hard master from my end as well.
I think what we're getting at is that if you approach like kind of like film or like television as a purely like economic transaction, you're just going to end up trying to maximize your entertainment for hours spent, which probably means you're never going to like stop looking at Netflix. Or to be fair, you're probably never going to stop watching cat videos on YouTube because they're free and are entertaining. So you need to appeal to this like kind of sense of like art or culture, or at least like fun, or being part of like a buzz, or being part of something bigger in order to justify the economic expense. And to be honest, if you can create something that's like a genuinely decent work of art that's also like a toy commercial, that isn't like a problem if you can appeal to that sense of like, art or buzz or being a part of like a culture or society, which I think the first Lego movie did really well. Even though, it's a giant toy commercial, but it's really fun and everyone's talking about it and everyone's like, singing the song when they're kind of bored at work and doesn't realize they're gently humming "Everything is Awesome." And like, you want to be like kind of a part of that, and you're willing to spend the money to do it, because we're not approaching our entertainment as a purely like economic transaction. And like giant toy commercials like the Lego movie can do that, but they have to like aspire to be something bigger than just like an economic transaction.
Well, it's a transaction to the extent it's, money in, fun out. I mean, I don't go to the cinema as much because I, to be honest, often feel a bit disappointed about the amount of fun I got out for the best part of a tenner. So you can still break it down to those material levels, don't get me wrong.
I think there's something else going on, which like the Lego movie, like really, the first one especially really did do, in that like it was like a good film and a good entertaining film. And like, I think one of the reasons why we've been sort of like mercilessly mocking some of these like other attempts to be giant toy commercials like the G.I. Joe film or Battleships is because they're not very good. They're not good films. That seems to be, whereas the Lego movie, even though it's like, the biggest toy commercial of all time, it is like a good film.
So once again, we come back to as long as you're good, and again, good often meaning doing ironic jokes. Score.
Yeah, that's what we've learned today.
Be sarcastic, lads. It's the cool thing to do. Okay, and that was Modern Fantasy Violence. Thank you for exchanging literally no money for the chance to hear us talk about exchanging money for stuff. If you want to exchange a few more minutes of your time for stuff we've done, you can go to modernfantasyviolence.com and read various blog posts and stuff we've written, including Alistair's recent one about The Punisher, as well as other articles from before that, such as our best of year stuff, as well as the occasional extra bit of audio from the podcast. You can also, if you do want to exchange something for the fun we've given you, go to iTunes or your podcast provider of choice and leave us a nice review, which might help other people enjoy the same transaction.
If you want to exchange even more of your time in order to support MFV, you can find us on social media. You can go to Twitter, where we are at MFV Podcast, or you can go to Facebook and just search for Moderate Fantasy Violence. I've been Alistair Ball. You can find me on Twitter at Alistair J.R. Ball. I promise I will actually post occasionally on Twitter rather than just like retweet witticisms at some point in the near future. But you can also find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com, which, to be honest, probably gets updated more frequently than my Twitter.
And you can find me at nickbryan.com, including details of the comics I publish, such as Little Deaths of Watson Tower and Moonframe, which are available either to buy from me directly or on popular digital app Comixology. And they're both quite good. There are review quotes on the website to prove they're quite good. And you can also follow me on Twitter, which I update slightly more than Alistair, mostly with either updates on my writing or attempts at humour at NickMB. And I believe that is it. We will be back in 2 weeks with our first big cinematic universe superhero film of the year. It's Captain Marvel. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Lego time.
Everything is awesome. Or is it?